Yeah, probably a good thumbnail. Uh, so, back with my uh, fucked up voice. Back with my usual videos where I make people unsubscribe very rapidly. And man, I should have taken a few minutes after I ate and drank so much. Excuse me. But yeah, today I want to continue on the series of things for why you should probably unsubscribe, and this video is going to be about refretting, things you should expect and why they happen and why they shouldn't happen and why normally you should not be in a position where you have to refret and why you actually go there eventually. Right, so as soon as my reflux goes away, I will start with a list of things that I actually noted down right there. Because I just wanted to not miss any of them. So please allow me to make myself comfortable. And yes, speak about the topics, I guess. No, yes. So, when you get into the unfortunate event of having to refret, when you get those frets out, and don't get me wrong, I'm not jumping ahead of the story here. I'm just going on a very slightly slightly sensible observation that I have to make. When you have to refret and you get your frets out, the old frets, the very first thing that you want to do is make sure that you level and correctly radius or re-radius and re-level your fretboard. So the actual wood. Why? Because whatever imperfection you have in the wood itself, if it's wavy or distorted in any way, torsion, whatever, this will eventually show up in the frets because that's their seating bed, right? So you don't want to correct those things after the frets are in, because you'll eventually correct it by eating away the frets by doing a post-refret fret leveling operation, and that just kind of defeats the purpose. You just put on these brand new frets, and now you start taking away 10% or 20% from the first get-go, just because you have to correct what's underneath and what should have been previously corrected in the wood itself. So make sure to correctly radius your fretboard and level it perfectly, especially if you're installing titanium or stainless steel frets, because you want to have those post-refret levels as accurate as possible, so that you only take very, very, very little material out of the new frets, not just because they're new and what I just said before, but also because with titanium and steel, stainless steel frets, you will eventually go through your tools, through your files or whatever, like this. They'll just eat themselves away against the far superior metal, which is stainless steel or titanium, right? So that's point number one. Now, when you are taking out the frets, and now we're going to the very beginning, when you're first taking out the frets, no matter what method you're doing, you're directly trying to pull them out like rotten teeth, or you're first heating them up and then you're trying to take them out so that you soften that glue on the inside, if it has any. Any of these things will eventually pose the risk of you damaging the finish. And when I talk about the finish, I'm talking about the finish on the side of your fretboard and also the finish on your fretboard. So of course, if that applies to you, on a rosewood you won't see it, but on maple you will. And also on the sides here, if your neck is high gloss, prepare to have some sort of damage, kind of, no matter how careful you are, because some things are just inevitable. Some of the things will slightly chip or crack or whatever when you're pulling those frets out. So be prepared for this, right? Another thing that you should expect, just like I briefly mentioned a few seconds ago, is chipping, and mainly in the fretboard, and mainly with brittle woods like rosewood or ebony. Those tend to be far more prone to exhibit chipping. Why? Because of the way in which the wood fibers align and the way in which you can actually break them into small chunks. So when you pull those frets out, be very careful, and also expect to have chipping here and there. And obviously you have to prepare for that with the countermeasures and how to properly fix it. It's not that big of a deal, but you should be mentally prepared not to go berserk when you see your precious fretboard being slightly chipped. Right, so yeah, that's point number 2. Point number 3 is, like I said, especially if you're heating the frets prior to taking them out. If your fretboard was, for example, maple and it was lacquered, expect to have some sort of damage, or let's say cosmetic touch-ups being done or having to be done prior to you finishing the whole operation. Actually, because I said in the very beginning that you should re-level and radius your fretboard. If you have like a high gloss finish on your fretboard, and in all fairness, your fretboard surface does not provide the best seating bed for the new frets that are about to go in, and you have to do this re-leveling and re-radiusing, you will probably need to just do it, and in the process of this you'll lose your finish coats, and you'll just have to re-coat it at the very end, which is not that bad if you ask me. But be prepared and have this in mind. Another thing is, when you take the frets out, a lot of people are like, yeah, I took them out, hopefully no chips, no chipping, nothing like that, and it's great for them. They just start coming in with the new frets. Hold on, there's a lot of things that need to happen in the meantime. First and foremost, you need to clean the inside of the slots. You need to run in with like a razor knife, X-Acto knife, whatever, and you need to make sure that there's no residue, no ugly wood bits or glue bits or resin or whatever stuck inside, and you need to provide like a very clean slot or channel or whatever for the new fret to go in seamlessly. You don't want to start putting it in the slot and then having to bang against it just because now you have some small chip inside that's obstructing it from fully letting it glide all the way down. Right, so you have to also take this into consideration. So you have to clean your slots also. And now I'm kind of asking for your imagination, because I don't want to edit the fuck out of this video, because if you're watching it, it means you kind of know what I'm talking about and you're passionate about these things. So I don't have to show you how a fret is, what a fret tang is, how the fret slot is. You probably know these things, right? So if not, just Google these terms, frets, fret slot, fret tang, and just have them in front of you while you're listening. So if this is the fretboard, and again, here it is, if this is the fretboard, when you take out the the frets, imagine that this is like a zoomed in version of the fret slot. Now, the fretboard on the top is flat, right? So when you have the fret slot, ideally, in this perfect geometry, you would have like this rectangular 90-degree shape where the slot comes in. And what I mean by this is right here. It won't focus, I'm sure, but yeah, this little thing right here, this small thing. Again, Google some high quality image and you'll see what I'm talking about. So that's the fret slot. So if this is the fretboard surface and this is the zoomed in fret slot, ideally it has these 90 degrees around the the corners. And also for the fret tang should be kind of like the opposite, which means that it's supposed to be like this is the fret with its crown, and now it has this T type of shape, which should kind of mix and match like some perfect Tetris piece falling into the fret slot perfectly, right? So you would expect that the fret tang is this, and then here again you have very nice and abrupt 90-degree angles, and then you follow along with the fret itself, which has the crown on top. Well, even if you manage to have like your fret slot with very good, almost 90-degree like angles, both on the inside and also on the outside where you reach the surface, you should actually not have this, and I'll tell you why. Because in the manufacturing process of the fret wire, when they make the fret tang, so again, it's the exact counter opposite of the fret slot. So I'll quit doing the sign for the crown, so we're only interested in this, right? So when they run the wire out and they're trying to achieve this perfect T form, because of the way in which the metal is melting and then hardening and being run through those small vices and rollers and whatnot. In the process of having this done, the metal will not have, or actually it will, but it won't retain it. It won't have this perfectly abrupt 90-degree angle right here at the top edge. It will kind of actually start to do this. So it's think of it as the perfect geometry that is put into a jello, and instead of retaining perfect rectangular shape, it kind of gives in under the tension and it slightly starts to round things off. It's a bad analogy, but a good visual one. So those super hard angles actually become this almost cone-like thing, like this weird V taper. So because of this, because of the shape in which the fret tang finalizes itself into, or stabilizes itself to be as, because of this, now when you're trying to fit it, it no longer has that Tetris thing that I was talking about. It's no longer this thing that goes into this other thing like this. So if you have your perfectly squared slot inside the wood for the fretboard, when you come in with this thing that's like this, it will slide in just a little bit and then it will get stuck before actually having its bottom, its belly, touch the fretboard. So you'll have that weird and ugly, unprofessional air gap in between the fretboard and the fret itself, which a lot of guitars have precisely because of this. They have fresh, perfectly leveled wood. They come in with this aggressive, perfect incision for the fret slot, and then they come in with the fret itself. And because of this, physical, small physical side effect that happens in the manufacturing process. Then there's trying to like fit it in and press it with the coal and whatever. And the worst thing that can happen is that it will give in for the moment and you won't have any space. So it will be slightly, I mean, not slightly, super packed in. But then because it's under pressure, the wood will work and it will actually press against this nice V-taper. And it's actually going to press against it, which will actually, just make it pop out. So you get a guitar that's perfect in the very beginning, and a few weeks or months after, the frets start popping out and you have no idea why. Well, it's because of stupid so-called perfect decisions that are being taken in the manufacturing process. People like to have this perfect incision for the fret slot. What was that sound I just made with my throat? That was weird. Anyway, so how do we fix this? Oh, Mr. M, how do we fix this? Well, it's very easy. You take one of those V files, so those triangular files that have like this V shape, and you run this V shape into the rectangular slot. Guess what this will do? It will turn this rectangular slot into like a slot that here at the top, at the interface with the surface, it starts having this this matching cone-like aspect or V-like aspect, which will actually make the non-square but V fret fit again like a Tetris piece, because now your slot is also not rectangular but V-like, so it's like V on V instead of V on whatever U or whatever. Anyway, hope that makes some sense. Again, if not, use some imagination and some Google images. And now that we were speaking about this, I actually want to go into the other aspect of the fret slots, which is actually gluing or not gluing them. Well, see, here's a big debate. Some people think it's absolutely necessary to glue them in. Some people say that's an abomination. Well, they're both correct. Why? Because if you insert the fret tang improperly, and I'll show you, actually I'll explain to you in a minute what that means. Or back to our very recent previous point with the fret tang being like this. If you don't take care of running that triangular file into your fret slots just a couple of times to give it that nice V shape, in this case, again, the frets will eventually pop out again. And that's why a lot of people say, well, unless you secure the fret well enough into the slot, eventually it will pop out, so I don't want to risk this, so I want to make sure it stays in there, and blah, blah, blah. Again, you absolutely have to glue the fret in, and I'm not going to say right now in what percentage it should be all along the, not watchtower, but the fret slot, or just in a few points, or whatever. Anyway, regardless, you have to glue your fret in if you are not V tapering your slot, and if you're inserting the fret tang incorrectly. So if you don't do any of these, which means you're correctly V tapering your slot and you're correctly inserting your fret in, the mechanics of the wood, which otherwise make it pop out, are actually going to work exactly against having it pop out, and it will actually make it, it will keep it, it will retain it in forever better than any glue. And the key in this is exactly what I alluded to previously, which is what we're running up to right now. and that is how to correctly insert the fret tang. So a lot of people have seen that the fret tang, has these small barbs around. Well, apparently for some reason it never occurs to them that those barbs have a role of not just scratching the fuck out of the fretboard around the fret slots when you're pressing them in, because if you're pressing them in vertically like this, the way people usually press frets in, those barbs on the fret tang are actually just grinding into the wood. And no, because you have barbs, they do not bind laterally into the wood like this, preventing it from popping out. They're actually coming in vertically, and they will come out vertically just as well. The way in which the fret tang was originally supposed to be inserted, and that's why you have those barbs around, but nobody uses them like that because it probably, apparently they're idiots, and again, they're gurus and big techs and luthiers on YouTube or even outside. The fret itself should never be put in like this and pressed. The way it was meant to be done, it was from the side. You actually have to slide it in like this. Why? Because again, if this is the fret tang, so on top here again you have the actual fret, right? And this is the fret tang. If the fret tang has those bars around on both of its sides, which are like small, lumps that should bind into the wood and prevent the fret from going in. If you're just pressing them like this, those small spikes actually just go in by pressing the wood like this. But again, their shape, let's say, the spikes are oriented sideways. So if you press them into the wood like this, eventually they'll get out. The way you want them to go in is like this, already into the wood. So let's say this is the surface of the fretboard. You want it below the surface of the fretboard and not be able to go out because it still has like 1 millimeter or whatever remaining wood that prevents it from doing so. But you'll say, well, you can't do this because there's no way you can put the fret in because the fret can only go from the top. How would you insert it like this? It's almost like, and this is actually what you want to achieve. It's almost like the fret tang would be perfectly flush, and a lot of people do this. They scrape off the barbs because, again, they don't know how it's meant to be. So they scrape off the barbs, and they make this perfectly smooth fret tang that just goes perfectly smooth in like this or like this. And because it's free to go either way, that's why they decide to glue, and in this case they have to glue down the fret. But what you want to achieve is, once the fret is in, let's assume for a moment that it would have no barbs. Once it's fully in, you all of a sudden want the barbs to magically appear from nowhere and just go sideways and just bite into the wood and keep it there. So how can you do this? Well, again, if instead of putting it into the slot like this from the top, you actually put it in like this, and it's very weird to say put it in like this and not like this. But when you do it like this, what you're doing is actually, again, this is your tang, barb, tang. So the barbs are kind of in the middle of this tang, which is like a very thin wool. Right, so if these are your barbs right here, when you make them go in like this, they actually create like a secondary shaft or slot, but going perpendicular on the direction of your main fret slot, the one that you use to put the frets like this incorrectly. So when you put them in like this, you're actually biting into the wood like this. I know it's a lot harder to push it into the wood like this, but if you do from the side, just slightly, you will be able to do it very easily. And what this does, again, this creates like this cross pattern. So your tangs will, the barbs on your tang will actually create this this left and right canal, let's say, under the surface of the fretboard, which will still give it like a mil or half a mil of wood, which you know, if this is your fret tang and these are the barbs, they'll still have a little bit of wood on top of them that will forever and for always prevent them from having the fret pop out. So if you do it like this, which is the correct way, and also you do the whole V tapering thing, you would actually never have to glue the frets in, and it's actually counterproductive to do so. And you would have much better, let's say, retention of the fret in its original position for the whole lifetime of the guitar. Far better than any wood, glue, sorry. Because yeah, it's actual material that's keeping it down, not just some wood that can dry out and crack with the passing of time, right? So we covered gluing the slots, tang insertion, yeah, tang filling. So also you have to be prepared that the fret slots are not exactly cut as per your fret tang dimension. So of course, if the tang is bigger, then it will force the fret into the wood, and again the wood will resist and will press against the fret, and eventually it's going to pop out. But if it's the opposite and the fret tang is smaller, then it will kind of wiggle. Again, it will sort of make you have to glue it in. But despite this, you will still have, let's say, quite a substantial gap of air inside the fret slot where the fret tang goes in, but it still has some sort of room around it. So especially at the ends where it actually meets the eyes of the player here, a lot of times you will see that, you know, the slot is like this, but the fret only goes in like this, because that's its maximum height, or I should say depth. Everything is seated perfectly on top of the fretboard, no air gap, so that you can still say, well, you haven't pressed it in fully, but still here on the bottom you will see that there's still some air, right? So how do you fix this? Well, you actually have to fill it in with something. Bless you. Yeah, and you usually fill this in, well, with glue, but usually with small, you know, let's say wood powder, and any residue that you can get from like filing down the same type of wood that you have on your fretboard, maple or rosewood or whatever, ebony, laurel, paulownia, doesn't matter. Actually, not paulownia. That's for bodies mainly. Paul Ferro or whatever. You kind of just rub a little bit of that material if you have some extra. If not, just something similar will work, so that you have a small wood powder. You can do it with a fine grain file or with sandpaper, and you just slightly press that powder in on both sides till you either fill in the underneath of the tang, the space underneath of the tang, or at least the sides, so that visually you don't have that air gap striking you when you look down on the fretboard on the sides of the neck, right? So you have to be prepared to do that also. And yeah, on a lot of guitars that are like, for example, with binding, especially on Les Pauls, you see this a lot, or on Gibsons usually, but also on Fenders and others, where you have side binding. Just again, if you don't know what binding is, search on Google for fretboard binding, and you'll see that you have this thin layer on the side that just surrounds the neck, but it's kind of like embedded into the profile of the neck. So what happens is that most of the time this binding will actually cover or come very close in contact with the fret ends, if not just cover them for like its thickness. And obviously, when you're refretting, you have to. I mean, if you're refretting a guitar that's like this with binding on the side, you have to take into account the fact that you'll probably mess up the binding and you'll have to redo it, or you might have to rebind it completely. Depends on how things are on that particular guitar, or at least you have to understand that the binding is meant to be there precisely so that you don't have this artifact that, well, some people consider it good, some people bad. They don't want to see this this fret end and the tang of the fret going all the way till the very edge of the fretboard, which was what I was discussing about earlier when I was telling you the technical details of this. So some people don't want to see this. They want to see that perfect binding strip going along. So obviously, if you have this, it means that the fret tang underneath kind of needs to stop a bit earlier than the actual fret itself. So usually, and now I'm talking to you by, oops, my very late Christmas tree that I still keep because it hasn't snowed yet, and I want to have the Christmas tree around when it snows, if it snows. So now I'm talking to you if you're looking at the fret like this, not like this anymore. So now this is your fret, and usually what you would have is that if this is the fret end, and by fret I mean the portion that's on the surface of the fretboard, the fret tang is also underneath at the same level, because obviously they're one piece, and when you cut it, it's just cutting it straight, right? So normally this is what happens when you have this effect right here, but because some people don't like it and they have this binding, the fret still needs to reach the end of the fretboard, whether or not it's covered by the binding, but underneath the binding, underneath the fret, sorry, you need to make room for this binding, which has a certain thickness. So now the fret end actually needs to be chipped or stripped, let's say, for some portion. So it can no longer be here. If this is the fret again and this is the fret tang, it has to kind of have to come with some pliers, some clippers, and kind of take this part away. So now it's like this, so that here on the side you have the thickness of the binding, right? So you have to also take precaution of this with the binding, with having to to remove the tang at the very end. You have to make sure that you don't damage the binding, or sometimes it's inevitable and you have to repair it and you have to reseat it, with hot air and whatever, hot press, or sometimes you just can't save it and you have to redo it. And if you have to redo it, probably the new one is going to look way too bright. The guitar has aged in the meantime. You need to achieve the same cream aged color, whatever. It's a complete mess. That's why I never wanted to mess too much with guitars with binding when it comes to refretting, because the customer will always complain about having some sort of change to the binding or the feel or the look, because they just think that magically you can swap the frets from within the binding without touching the binding, which cannot happen physically in the way it's done right now with guitar construction. And even though the new binding might be better because the old one might be damaged or whatever, then they complain that you messed up their vintage feel or whatever. So I don't want to hear about such customer specific butt hurts. So my usual disclaimer was, if you want me to work on your frets and you have a binding, it might come out not exactly the same way it was before. It might look slightly newer, it might look slightly whatever, thicker, better, different consistency, texture, or whatever. So yeah, what else? yeah, when, and this is a lot of, I've seen a lot of people doing this stupid crap. So what they do usually, they do all the things that I talked about previously. They do it wrong, but still, they put in the frets, and usually, normally the fret is slightly longer on both sides of the fretboard, so it's put like this, and then they come in with pliers to cut the excess off on both sides. And the greatest thing is that they do all of the minutia things, like, you know, gluing it, seating it perfectly with the press, you know, with the caul, and, you know, perfect pressure. They adjust everything, the tank, the blah blah blah. Although they're doing it the incorrect way, still in that incorrect way, they're doing the best job of doing it incorrectly, and they pay all this attention to it. But all this time, the fret ends are still not cut. And when they're finally done with everything, now they come in with the pliers, and they bite onto the frets, and they do this back and forth rocking, because sometimes it doesn't come off that easily. So you kind of bite into the metal, and as it's biting in, you kind of do this so that it finally clamps, and the fret end snaps, and you get your cut. And they do all of these stupid things. And also sometimes, you know, they rock it in. At least if you rock it, you should do it like sideways, like this. So you should do it like this, not like this, up and down. So anyway, the point is, after you've paid all that attention to all the pressure details and whatever, you finish with the whole thing, and now it occurs to you to cut the frets that should have been done first. And guess what? When you start doing this, you're just destroying every precision work that you've done previously, which is complete and utter stupidity on most luthiers' sides and tech sides. But again, they're purists, they know better. They've been doing this for a lifetime, and I don't know what I'm talking about. So yeah, anywho, so have this in mind, please. First cut the fret ends, and then start whatever precision work you want to have. Because also coming in with the file at the very end to level it flush with you know, to level the frets flush with the wood right here, also that kind of disrupts things a bit. But let's say in some cases it's necessary, although again, even that can be avoided if you perfectly pre-cut the frets beforehand, and you kind of babysit every step of the process. But when it's done in bulk, you don't have that luxury. So coming to our last step, when we're talking about this leveling, this flush leveling of the frets with the fretboard, with the side of the neck actually, a lot of people have this stupid tool again, which is this this side fret level file, which is like a wood block with a file mounted in it, and the file is usually at a 45-degree angle or more if you're counting like this, or less if you're counting from this side. So it's actually 45 or this way, which aggravates the problem. What problem? The one that I'm going to discuss right now. When you're doing this crappy thing and you're doing this motion on the neck, so that you actually flush down the frets, you actually end up with fret ends like these. And again, I know it won't focus. Feel free to look at your guitar or look at pictures online. You'll see that the frets at the very end have this slope, and this slope kind of has exactly this angle that I'm talking about, which is the 45-degree angle, or even worse. So again, what does this do? Instead of providing you with useful fret surface up until the very end of the fretboard edges, you have this slope, which visually might look refined or whatever, but it's a very bad idea because on the surface of the slope, you can no longer have your string go all the way till the very end. Like here, I can bend up and down. Here, I can bend up and down. But if I approach this, let's say, point of no return, or this event horizon of the fret's black hole, once I go here, it completely slides because of this, like this is the fret, all fine and dandy, and then at the very end, instead of keeping that final millimeter or whatever, now it starts going down, and it's actually not 1 millimeter. 1 millimeter would be way too good. This is like 2 or even 3 in some cases. So it takes a lot of range from the edges of your fretboard. Like here, it just very easily slides off of the fretboard, and also in this side as well, because it's mirroring the effect, right? So the way you should be doing this is when you're doing that crappy thing that I said with the file that's mounted like this, well, that file should never be mounted like this. It should be like this, and you should do this sort of motion so that you actually level the fret ends flush with the neck and the fretboard at a close to right angle. Okay, if you don't want to have it right angle, don't, but it doesn't matter, because right angle is perfect, because you won't leave it like this, which actually happens with people who level like this. So not only are they fucking up the fret edges, but they also leave it unfinished, because in their opinion this is the finish of the fret ends, and they scratch like hell. No, you should do it like this, vertically, close to vertical, 90 degrees. And once you finish it off like this, now you come with the additional step that should always be performed, but again in bulk, especially for cheap guitars, it's never performed, which is dressing your fret ends. And the best thing to do in order to save as much as possible from that last portion of the fret is to actually give it a very very fine refinement, very ball, spherical like refinement. And actually a lot of guitar companies, for example like LTD, I'm saying LTD, well, a lot of guitar companies are doing this, but the very first production guitar that I've seen this on, because I was thinking that I thought of the unthinkable, and I had like the secret sauce, and then I saw it on a production model, and I was like, well, so apparently, well, A, I didn't invent it, obviously. It would have been too simple and cool at the same time. But B, it's actually doable, and it's just a matter of putting in the work, the attention to details, and not being lazy and cheap. So LTD really stands out for me when I'm thinking about the spherical fret ends, because it's the very first guitar that I've seen with this technique. Again, I was in the middle of developing this technique for myself when I was working on guitars, and I've never seen this done on a production model before, and LTD just happened to come in accidentally to me for some usual setup from one of my friends, and I saw this very nice ball end at the edges, and I was like super impressed. I was like, so it is possible, and it doesn't cost a fortune. Granted, it probably costs a little bit more, because obviously you need to put in a little bit more work, but boy oh boy does it pay off. You literally feel like the same guitar that's probably low entry, like a $200 guitar, you literally feel it go from like the $200 range to the 6 or 8 or 1K range. Right, so it's the little things that make it count. So anyway, I just think that I completely exhausted my list, and I'm right. So in order not to put too much burden on your poor soul, more than I have so far, I'll let you go, but not before letting you know, as always, that if you liked it, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give me 2 thumbs down. and subscribe, unsubscribe, hate, troll, comment, whatever. Chances are I will unfortunately do the very thing that annoys you, so I'll have a lot more unsubscriptions coming my way the exact same way I've been having them for the past few weeks. So keep them up. Maybe I can be like a channel without precedent. I'll have my subscriptions go up and then I'll return back to zero. Wouldn't it be cool to have like negative subscriptions, like on the minus side? That would be something, right? So yeah, until next time, please tell me how much or just how much you hate this channel, and I love you too. So bye bye. Oh yes.